President Donald Trump's rapid and aggressive military expansion around the world is plunging the global community into the very state of anarchy that the New World Order has been trying to achieve for years. Let's take a quick trip through the global hotspots. First, let's look at Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov just announced that the relationship between the United States and Russia has plummeted. He said that international relations between the two countries are worse today than they ever were at the peak of the Cold War. He said, quote, "Then there were two empires, the Western and the Soviet one, and each of them was fueling conflicts with the rival on the territories of third-party countries, but never within its own borders and never directly against each other. Even the public rhetoric was softer. The two camps did not cross the bounds of what was permitted, but today there are no more rules." Lavrov's comments come as NATO rejects Russia's invitation for them to join in peaceful discussions at the 6th Moscow Conference on International Security. Instead, NATO is focusing on placing more troops and missiles on Russia's doorstep. Meanwhile, the United States has quietly dispatched members of the U.S. Army into Donetsk to train the Ukrainian military in its fight against the resistance forces who object to the 2014 overthrow of the pro-Russian government of Ukraine. The government was overthrown in 2014 by the CIA and George Soros-funded agitators. One of my contacts in the region is Russell Bentley, an expatriate from Texas, who moved to Donetsk in southeastern Ukraine to join the Novo-Russian Armed Forces as an RPG gunner in the fight against the U.S.-backed Ukrainian military. Bentley reports that the USA and its Ukrainian puppet government have been collaborating to import Islamic terrorists into the territory to fight the resistance forces. Referring to an article that was just published regarding the arrival of 500 more Islamic fighters into Ukraine, Bentley said, quote, "These are not the first. They've been coming into Odessa for more than a year. And who do you think supplies the ships that transport battalions of ISIS terrorists? The Western Ukrainians are broke. It's the USA. The USA who supports terrorist cannibals in Syria and Iraq and Nazi war criminals in Ukraine. Thanks to USA and UCROP Nazis for importing these terrorists. Now we will not have to travel all the way to Syria to give them the permanent cure." And now, turning to Syria. The U.S. government approved a major Israeli airstrike on the outskirts of the Syrian capital city of Damascus on Thursday. The Israeli fighter jets struck an arms supply hub operated by the Lebanese Hezbollah fighters who are in Syria at the invitation of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In the Syrian crisis, the United States and its allies have paid foreign mercenary forces, including the terrorists who were used to overthrow the government of Libya, to come into Syria to fight the Syrian army. In response, the Syrian government called upon the assistance of the Lebanon-based Hezbollah forces to come to their aid. The forces hired by the United States are primarily Sunni Muslims, whereas Hezbollah is primarily Shia Muslim. The nation of Iran is predominantly Shia as well. The Syrian government is receiving regular supplies of weapons from Tehran, some of which are stored at the depot outside of Damascus, near the airport. These weapons are used by the thousands of Hezbollah fighters who are engaged in some of the most dangerous fronts against the U.S.-backed mercenary forces. The Israeli Air Force targeted the weapons depot with 5 airstrikes, causing a massive explosion and extensive fires. Rami Abdel Rahman, head of a UK-based monitoring group, said that the blast was so huge that it could be heard up to 20 miles away. The weapons depot is connected to the Damascus International Airport. I verified on FlightRadar24.com that just hours before the Israeli attack, 4 cargo planes from Iran had landed to deliver supplies. Folks, remember, this is an attack by the government of Israel against the government of Syria. This is an act of war. It's an act that would not have happened without the consent of the United States. My opinion is that following the universal condemnation of Donald Trump's Tomahawk cruise missile strikes in Syria, the immediate plan is to continue the fight using Turkey and Israel as temporary proxies until international pressure on Trump subsides a bit. The problem is that while Turkey hates Syria and is supporting ISIS fighters who are trying to overthrow the Syrian government, at the same time Turkey does not support another group of fighters who are also trying to help the USA overthrow Assad. jihad. That other group is called the Kurdish YPG, or the Popular Protection Units. Underscoring just how confusing a mess the United States has created in Iraq and Syria, the Turks are being used by the USA to fight against Syria. ISIS is being used by the USA to fight against Syria, and the Kurdish YPG are being used to fight against Syria. However, the Turks are helping ISIS to also fight against the Kurds, something that the USA says it does not support. Yesterday, Turkish President Recep Erdogan ordered multiple airstrikes that killed dozens of Kurdish fighters in Iraq and Syria, drawing sharp rebukes from Iraq, Syria, and oddly enough, from the United States. The U.S. State Department spokesman Mark Toner said, quote, "We are very concerned, deeply concerned, that Turkey conducted airstrikes earlier today in northern Syria as well as northern Iraq without proper coordination, either with the United States or the broader coalition to defeat ISIS." I know that this is confusing, so let me tell you the truth that the deep state-controlled mainstream media is not telling you. The Central Intelligence Agency uses terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS to do its dirty work in the Middle East and in North Africa, through our own various allies, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey. Money, weapons, and logistical support is given to those terrorists in order to hide the CIA's own involvement. But these terrorist groups are maniacs. They have agendas of their own that they are trying to accomplish, which includes the creation of a barbaric Islamic empire with themselves in control of it. They take the weapons that we give them and they do the jobs that we give them to do. However, they also go off the reservation, so to speak, and do their own missions. Basically, the CIA wants to use these people to keep the Middle East in a perpetual state of chaos and destabilization. This destabilization keeps the military-industrial complex earning money, and it also provides profit opportunities for multinational corporations and oil companies. The U.S.-backed terrorist groups like ISIS create this state of destabilization through absolute terror and barbarism. The local populations flee, they leave as refugees, and they follow pre-established routes through Eastern Europe that have been created by the money and influence of George Soros. These refugees then flood into Western Europe and are gradually destabilizing nations like the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. But the United States does not completely control these terrorist groups, so we don't want them to gain the upper hand and take control in places like Iraq and Syria either. And that is why we have the United States helping ISIS fighters in parts of Syria and Iraq, while at the same time fighting against ISIS in other parts of Syria and Iraq. It's complete insanity, but it serves the purposes of the New World Order globalists. The New World Order controls U.S. foreign policy through the Council on Foreign Relations and the U.S. State Department. It controls the military-industrial complex and uses the CIA as its own personal intelligence and war machine. This shadow government operates regardless of which party or president is in power. Donald Trump is not in control. He might like to make us think that he is, but he isn't. And I think most of you would agree that Donald Trump has done a 180-degree turn on almost every single foreign policy position that he took while campaigning for the presidency. Let's now turn to the Pacific Theater, where tensions are boiling over. On Wednesday, Russia warned that the Korean Peninsula is on the brink of war. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for 3 hours in the Kremlin on Thursday. Putin said that both Russia and Japan believe that the situation has, quote, seriously deteriorated. The meeting comes as Japanese destroyers link up with the USS Carl Vinson strike group in the Korean Peninsula. Meanwhile, the United States has deployed controversial THAAD missile systems into South Korea, drawing not only a rebuke from South Korea's leading presidential candidate, but from scores of angry South Korean citizens who poured into the streets to hurl glass bottles at the U.S. military convoy as it carried the THAAD missile system components. Several protesters were injured in clashes with the police. The United States is taking advantage of the situation in South Korea, where the nation's president was recently impeached and removed from office. The people of South Korea have reasons to object to the missile systems, because the placement of these systems is not so much about protecting the South Koreans from North Korea, as it is about the United States capitalizing on the chaos to make provocative moves in its ongoing geopolitical battle with China. THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. The system has three components: radar, a command center, and a missile launcher. The components can be set up close together or further apart to increase the radar's coverage. The stated purpose of the system is to track offensive missile fire and knock those incoming missiles out of the air. However, China's biggest concern is THAAD's radar system, which will likely be used to spy into Chinese airspace and compromise their first strike capabilities. In response to South Korea hosting this missile system, China has begun a harsh crackdown on South Korean businesses and has stated its intent to do much more. Also, China's Defense Department has warned the United States that the THAAD deployment shifts the balance of power in the region toward the United States, something which the Chinese government will not tolerate. In response, China has announced a new weapon system to counter THAAD. Beijing's Defense Ministry spokesman Yang Yujun said Thursday that the Chinese military will carry out exercises with the new weapons in order to demonstrate to the United States that it will not be able to gain a military advantage in its own backyard. In essence, the USA has kicked off a new arms race in both the Eastern and Western theaters. And not to be left out of the fray, this week, North Korea's Kim Jong-un conducted large-scale artillery drills to show off the conventional weaponry power that could annihilate the capital of South Korea. Seoul, which sits just 35 miles from the North Korean border, is home to over 25 million people. So we've got the United States using NATO to surround and provoke Russia, while simultaneously using its allies in the Pacific region to surround and provoke China. We can add in the hot zones of Ukraine, Turkey, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, South Korea, North Korea, the Philippines, Japan, and half a dozen other nations that are playing major roles, including the United Kingdom. And what we have are the two primary sides that will be battling each other in World War III. The lines have been drawn. Folks, I was a history major. I have studied the world wars in detail, including what led to them. I'm telling you that conditions in the world right now are intractable. World War III is inevitable. The opening skirmishes are already taking place. Whether the full-scale global war breaks out next week or next year, the war is going to take place, and I strongly recommend that you begin preparing now if you've not already done so. You need to have enough non-perishable food and water in your home so that each member of your family can survive for a minimum of 3 months. You need to have alternative sources of heat for cooking in case electricity is not available. Hopefully none of these things will be necessary, but setting aside the threat of conventional weapons, we also now live in an age where we have problems like chemical or biological weapons, as well as cyber attacks that could shut down our electric grids. If you have not already subscribed to the End Times News Report, click the button and do it now. Share this video with your friends and spread the word. If you find the information in my reports useful, you're welcome to leave me a tip at paypal.me/endtimesnewsreport, or you can make a donation at patreon.com/endtimesnewsreport. Thanks so much for watching. For the End Times News, I'm Jake Morphonios.